General Hospital spoilers reveal that finally, the blow Rick had been preparing for so long was struck in the courtroom, causing everything to explode in an instant. While Diane was still trying to fend off the continuous attacks from the opposition, Rick suddenly requested the judge to summon a new witness, someone not on the original list, someone unexpected, but with enough power to shatter the entire image Michael had been trying to protect. The courtroom door opened, and the woman who entered silenced everyone. She wasn't a lawyer, not a family member, nor a psychologist brought in to assess parental fitness. She was a nurse, and more than that, she was Michael's former lover during his time in Germany. Without much introduction, the woman's testimony began as a whisper, but quickly turned into a storm. She recounted in detail the weeks-long affair she and Michael had while he was being treated at a medical center in Europe, supposedly to find peace and recover physically and mentally after the losses in Port Charles. But the truth was, while everyone back home thought Michael was struggling to get by, he was leading an entirely different life, one filled with romantic dinners, unnamed nights, and a series of relationships, with this nurse just being one of them. She didn't just speak, she presented text messages, emails, and private images that had never been revealed. In them, Michael didn't appear as someone struggling with trauma but as a confident man, purposeful, and coldly approaching women with the certainty of someone who always knew what he wanted. Even more shockingly, the witness revealed that Michael didn't just have her. He had multiple encounters with other women in different countries during the same period, an array of fleeting, suggestive relationships, enough to push him from a devoted father to the depths of moral skepticism. Willow sat motionless, her eyes full of confusion and slowly shattering. All the times she defended Michael, all the words she used to justify him against Nina's attacks, now seemed meaningless. She had once believed in him absolutely, thinking that if anyone deserved to gain custody of Wiley and Amelia, it was Michael, the father who always stood up for his children, unwavering in his love. But now, that man was revealed with a different face, cold, deceitful, and living a double life to the extreme. Diane said nothing. She knew that any rebuttal now would only make things worse. Rick sat firmly with a small smile, not needing to show any signs of triumph, because the victory was spreading on its own like a slow-burning fire. The judge furrowed his brow, unable to hide his disappointment. And Sonny, who had once defended Michael at all costs, now couldn't help but feel betrayed, not just by Michael's actions, but by the prolonged deception. So deep and enduring, that he no longer knew what was real and what was fake within his own family. The media exploded. Journalists sitting behind hurriedly typed their first lines about an unexpected witness revealing Michael's secret love life. The image of the ideal father, the wounded man fighting to get his children back, was now replaced with a new picture, a man who played with women's emotions, living a secret life, and skilled enough to hide it from everyone, even his closest family members. For Sasha, this truth was like a final blow. She knew she had once been part of those relationships. But when she thought she was the only one in Port Charles who knew the truth, now it spread like a stain on the water, swallowing her and the baby she was carrying. The question Rick threw into the trial, whether the baby was truly Michael's, was no longer just a psychological weapon, but the peak of an obsession. Not just one woman, but many, not just one country, but many places, and not just emotions, but purposeful choices, all came together to form an indictment strong enough to convict without a jury. Michael said nothing. He bowed his head, his hands gripping the chair. No more excuses. No more denials. What he had kept hidden was now exposed to dozens of eyes, hundreds of cameras. And even the two children he had once claimed were his reason for existing. And from that moment, the obsession officially began, not just for Michael, but for all who had once believed he was the only one who could protect what was right. Now, they all had to face a bitter truth. The person they had defended turned out to be the best at hiding things. And what happened next would no longer be a legal dispute, it would be the complete collapse of an image, a family, and a belief that had been far too fragile. Willow felt nothing except the heavy buzzing in her ears, a cold dizziness flowing from her neck down her spine, making her body feel as if it were frozen. In front of her, the trial continued, words still echoed, but everything seemed distorted through a foggy glass. She blinked, trying to shake off the panic, but could not deny it. The man she had loved, the father she had so fiercely defended, was now standing before her not as a devoted husband, but as someone full of dark secrets she never could have imagined. She had once thought Nina's doubts were just malice. She had believed Rick was simply playing his role as an adversary in court. She had defended Michael to the end, believing that no matter how tumultuous their past had been, their present was secure. But when that nurse stood up, with eyes as cold as steel, listing every detail. Every night Michael spent in Germany, every shady affair, every encounter, every soft word now became evidence of deception. Willow had nowhere to turn. Everything she had once trusted crumbled in an instant. And the most painful part was not that the truth was so brutal, but that Michael had perfectly deceived her for such a long time. All while looking into her eyes and talking about their future, their children, raising Wiley and Amelia together. Nina, sitting behind, felt something she hadn't been prepared for. Though she had once hated Michael, publicly criticizing him as the barrier between her and her daughter, she too couldn't help but be shocked when the truth was exposed. She never imagined it would go this far. Part of her had wanted to prove that Michael wasn't perfect, as Willow had believed. But what was happening before her wasn't just a simple mask being ripped off. It was a chain of actions leading to the complete public collapse of a man, a shattered image revealed by truth. By living evidence, and by betrayal no one saw coming. And in the midst of this atmosphere, Rick didn't miss a single opportunity. He was no longer a mere prosecutor, he was the architect of a strategic collapse, meticulously calculated down to the smallest detail. What he did wasn't simply ask questions, it was a series of blows. Cutting off every remaining root of trust in Michael. He extended the cross-examination, repeating sensitive details, dissecting every word Michael had said in the past, every moral speech. Every claim that he was the devoted father. Rick knew he didn't need Michael to confess, he just needed Michael to remain silent long enough for the judge and the public to understand that silence was the clearest admission of guilt. Diane still clung to the weaknesses in the witness's testimony, but every small action Michael took, how he avoided eye contact, the slight trembling of his hands when he folded papers, the heavy breaths he couldn't conceal, betrayed him. There was nothing left to hide. Nothing left to protect. The image of the ideal father, the self-sacrificing man, the responsible son, was now exposed as a two-faced, deceitful man, manipulating women's emotions and putting himself above everything else. Willow lowered her head, her eyes red. Though no tears fell, it was no longer pure pain, but the profound emptiness of someone realizing they had been utterly betrayed, from trust to love. She turned to look at Sasha, who was also bowing her head, no longer maintaining her strength. Between them was no longer a rivalry over a man's affections, it was two women. Equally hurt by a man they had once thought was their anchor. Nina reached out toward Willow, but she pulled away. Willow no longer knew who to trust. No more mother, no more husband, no more support. Rick had done what no one else could do, he had made Willow question her entire life, every choice, everything she had once believed to be true. And Michael, cornered, seemed to realize that there was no turning back. The evidence, the witnesses, and the evident hurt in Willow's eyes were a verdict heavier than any judgment. Rick had turned the custody battle into a moral trial, and Michael, the man who seemed to have the upper hand, was now the one suffering from the ultimate obsession. Watching everything he had built collapse piece by piece before everyone. This was no longer an unexpected twist. It was real madness, a chain of actions and truths exposed far beyond the limits of a lawsuit. It had become the most vivid nightmare that anyone in that courtroom would never forget. And in that moment, as all of Port Charles was caught in the whirlwind of truth and betrayal, one thing became clearer than ever: obsession was no longer a metaphor. It was reality, brutal, cruel. And no one could escape it. The storm in the courtroom seemed to have reached its peak after a series of shocking testimonies, but then another bombshell was dropped, this time from Michael's darkest secret, a truth he had kept hidden during his time in Germany, a truth that no one, not even Sasha or Willow, had ever known. Just when it seemed like all the wounds had been exposed, Rick unexpectedly asked the judge for permission to reveal one more detail, the final piece of evidence. The fatal blow to the image of the devoted father Michael had been trying to build in the battle for custody. Rick spoke calmly, but with a cold edge. Each word cutting through the already heavy atmosphere. In the medical records, the paperwork, and the testimony from the nurse who had been Michael's lover in Germany. An undeniable truth was exposed. Michael had a secret child with this woman, born in Germany during the time he was supposedly recovering physically and mentally. The room fell silent. And all eyes turned to Michael, who now sat motionless, his face expressionless, as if all the blood had drained from his body. Sasha, who had believed she was the only one who had ever had a deep and complex relationship with Michael, was also stunned into silence. She had believed that the times they had been together were real. That if Michael had hidden anything from her, it was only old wounds, not a new life existing thousands of miles away. Sasha's gaze, initially one of shock, slowly turned to utter confusion. She could not speak, because all the questions had already been answered in Michael's silence. She had once carried a child that no one believed was Michael's, and now, the truth not only hurt her, but made her realize she had never truly known the man she had loved. Willow was on the brink of collapse. After all the shocks regarding infidelity, secret relationships, she now had to face something even worse. The man she had entrusted with her heart, the man with whom she had built a home, had another family, and worse still, had buried that truth as though it had never existed. She felt like a replacement, like a victim caught in a hypocritical game, where everything she had believed in had been built on a rotten foundation of deceit. Rick didn't need to say much. He knew the victory was his. By revealing this secret child, he had not only shattered Willow's trust and the public's sympathy, but also destroyed Diane's entire legal strategy. He had made the judge, the legal team, and even outsiders question. If Michael could hide a child for all this time, what else could he be hiding? And that became a new obsession, a nightmare Michael had no escape from. The image of the ideal father, the devoted husband, the honest man, all of that was now consumed by a wave of doubt. The damage was no longer just to his reputation or his custody rights. It had struck at the very core of trust, the one thing that had remained after Michael's moral failures. And now, even that trust had crumbled. Diane tried to argue, but even she struggled to salvage a case that had been turned upside down. The existence of another child, hidden from public view, was not just a moral failing, it was a legal stain. A detail that altered the entire court's assessment of Michael's fitness as a father. In the eyes of the law, this was deliberate concealment, an unforgivable act when the protection of children was at stake. Michael remained silent. He didn't need to speak. He knew what was happening. He knew each brick of the image he had built was falling down, one by one, creating a dark void where nothing could exist but regret. But what hurt more than anything was not that he had failed, it was that he no longer had anyone to trust him. Willow, Sasha, Carly, Sunny, even Diane, they all now looked at him as a stranger. As a betrayer, a man who had used silence to avoid responsibility, letting his own flesh and blood grow up in the dark. And with that secret, with a child who had never been named, never had the chance to know who his father was, Rick had delivered the final blow to Michael, a blow that not only made him lose, but also convicted him in the eyes of those who had once loved him most. This was no longer a legal battle. This was the complete collapse of a man, from the inside out. And that was the greatest tragedy, one that no one could save him from. The final victory seemed to be slowly tipping in Nina and Rick's favor. An alliance that had seemed fragile but was proving far stronger than anyone in the courtroom had expected. Their coordination, one side a mother willing to do anything to keep her grandchild close, the other a sharp lawyer unafraid to bend moral boundaries, was creating a turning point in the balance of power. A barrage of legal attacks, coupled with the full exploitation of Michael's dark secrets from the past, had created an entirely new battlefield, where values that had once been considered foundational, family love, trust, The image of the ideal father, were now being overturned and torn apart into fragmented, chaotic memories. The shock of the secret child in Germany was an unexpected blow. It didn't just shake Diane's legal arguments, it was a direct punch to the hearts of Willow, Sasha, and Carly, those who had once stood by Michael with complete trust and protection. But Nina and Rick didn't stop there. They continued to exploit the judge's doubts, hitting at the weakest point of the case, Michael's true character. The evidence, testimonies, and stories of secret relationships not only painted Michael as dishonest but also as dangerous if entrusted with custody of the two children. And in the eyes of the law, that was more than enough to strip Michael of every right he had once held. Amid the crashing waves of unfavorable developments, Carly realized that the original plan she and Michael had set up, a strategy revolving around creating the perfect image of the devoted father and the unstable mother, Willow, was now completely useless. The adjustment they had to make was not just tactical in the courtroom, but an entirely new approach. Carly, who had once been so confident in controlling the situation, was now pushed into a position she couldn't predict, a mother trying to salvage her son's honor while the entire truth was slowly being laid bare in the most brutal way possible. Michael, meanwhile, was floundering and exhausted. He knew that every step from here on was not about winning but minimizing the damage. What he had hidden, what he had believed would never be uncovered, was now being used against him. And worse, it was being exploited not by distant enemies, but by those he had once underestimated or taken for granted. His arrogance, pride, and complacency had led him straight into the trap Rick and Nina had set. Nina, at this point, was no longer the woman pushed aside, judged wrongly, and hurt by her loved ones. She was now on top, not just in the courtroom but in the eyes of the public. She was the mother, the grandmother, the one who had warned about Michael long ago, but no one had listened. And now, as the truth unfolded, Nina didn't need to say much, every piece of evidence was speaking for her. The tears once considered weakness now became living proof of the truth she had tried to hide. Rick, standing beside her, was slowly crafting the final judgment without words for Michael, and everyone understood, this was not a mere trial, but a systematic collapse. Diane, no matter how skilled, was starting to feel the weight of pressure. Each question from Rick, each sharp rebuttal, each unexpected piece of evidence, had her scrambling in a defensive position. And Carly, who had once poured everything into maintaining the family's image, now had to admit that her past interventions, from the secrets hidden to the times she had tried to bend the truth, had contributed to the current situation. A situation that could no longer be covered up, no longer saved with the traditional manipulations of Port Charles. The victory of Nina and Rick didn't come from a single blow. It came from accumulation, from gradually pushing the opponent to the edge, forcing them to expose their weaknesses. Every time Michael remained silent in response to a question. Every time Willow looked at him with suspicion, every time Carly looked at Diane for help with no words left to say, was another step closer for Nina and Rick to their ultimate victory. And in that moment, when everything seemed to have been decided, there remained only one question that no one dared to answer. Was there any way for Michael and Carly to turn the situation around? Or had everything they had tried to protect, their honor, custody rights, and family image, been swept away forever in the raging waves of truth? Diane and Carly are at an inevitable crossroads. As everything they've worked so hard to protect, from Michael's honor to his child's custody, is crumbling under the weight of legal pressure from Rick and Nina. But when they're pushed against the wall, in the darkness of despair, the biggest secrets they've ever kept about Drew and Willow become the last cards that can turn the tide. And now, the two powerful women of Port Charles are seriously considering, if someone has to be sacrificed to save Michael, are Drew and Willow willing to be the victims? Because Carly knows, and Diane knows better than anyone, that Drew isn't quite the man he appears to be in court. In the not-too-distant past, Drew tampered with Michael's medical records in Germany, using the title of legal guardian to cover up serious financial wrongdoings and the identity of his secret child. Not only that, he also used his influence within ELQ to manipulate some of the shadow investments that financed his trips to Europe, including keeping the secret of Michael's illegitimate child a secret. Willow, meanwhile, was not the pure victim that everyone thought. There were recordings and emails between her and Drew that proved that the two of them had repeatedly manipulated the legal documents related to child custody, creating a false image in front of the judge. She had known about Michael's relationship with Sasha, had tacitly accepted it as part of their complicated marriage, but denied it in court to gain an emotional advantage. And worse, there were signs that she had planned to leave Port Charles with Drew, taking the two children with her, before the case even went to trial, despite the fact that custody had not yet been decided. All of that information, until now, has been kept secret. Carly holds the key. Diane was a person who could wield it legally and ruthlessly. And when they both realized that if things continued on their current course, Michael would not only lose custody of the children but also face prosecution for perjury and lying to the court. The only option left was to throw it all on the table, even if it meant burning the people closest to him. The secrets were cooked, as Carly described them, that is, ready, ripe to explode into a new storm in the courtroom. They were no longer vague rumors, but concrete evidence, legal documents, deleted but recovered conversations. Witnesses who had been silent but were now willing to speak if protected. Once they were brought to court, the entire battle map would change. But what made things even more dangerous was the nature of the secrets themselves. Not only will they land Drew and Willow in jail or in trouble, they could also permanently ruin their careers and reputations. Willow, who fought to the death for her two children, could lose both. Drew, who was once a symbol of honor and loyalty, could be ousted from any power structure. And of course, public opinion will not forgive anyone involved in this series of lies. Diane, with her characteristic calm, has not yet made a final decision. But she understands that if Rick takes over the battlefield, the price Michael will have to pay will not only be custody of the children, but legal and moral destruction. And Carly, who has always put her family first, is gradually becoming tougher. She is no longer the woman who only knows how to protect her loved ones by hiding the truth. She is willing to use the truth to save what is left, even if the price is to push those who once stood by her into the abyss. Another explosion is coming, not from Rick, but from the other side. And if those secrets are truly exposed in the courtroom, no one will be able to call this a normal trial. It will become a battlefield, where trust is betrayed, where family is no longer a shield, and where survival depends on who gets to the truth first, and who is willing to pay the price to do so.